market. Thank you. And Brian.
王赓武's mission in life has been to chronicle the global experience of Chinese migrants. It's one he knows well, having arrived in Australia from Malaysia in 1968 to become Professor of Far Eastern History at the Australian National University. Does home have to be a country or a city? Or is home this house or that? We have been fortunate. We seemed always to have been home, he famously recounted. From his time at ANU to becoming Vice-Chancellor of the University of Hong Kong before then joining the National University of Singapore, Professor Wang's groundbreaking research has helped shape concepts of identity and belonging, two such themes that resonate widely with many Chinese Australians. The王赓武Lecture aims to shine a light on their achievements and significant contribution to Australian life.
Good evening. My name is Michelle Law, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this year's王赓武Lecture, an initiative of the National Foundation for Australia-China Relations in partnership with the ABC. I'd also like to extend a special welcome to the Honourable Linda Burney, Minister for Indigenous Australians, all ministers in attendance with us today, and Professor王赓武himself, who at the age of 93 has travelled from Singapore with his family to be with us tonight. We're so lucky to have you joining us, Professor. Thank you. Tonight we are here to recognise and celebrate the long-standing contributions of Chinese Australians to our country. For more than 2 centuries, Chinese Australians have helped shape the fabric of our nation, making indelible marks across all sectors, from government and business to education and the arts. There's a unique alchemy born of the connections that Chinese Australians have with our country and our roots, and it's what drives our contributions. As Professor王赓武said himself in his remarks at last year's eponymous lecture, connecting Australia with our near north of Southeast Asia and China is vital to our country's future. Sharing her own story tonight is our brilliant keynote speaker, Ming Long, whose insights will contribute to the growing library of王赓武lectures. As a settler myself, it's immensely humbling to be standing here on the unceded lands of the world's most ancient and long-standing storytellers, as we bear witness to the stories of others. I'd now like to introduce Shane Halloran, who will be delivering a welcome to country.
Yuma, Yumalundi, Yangu Ngalawiri, Dunimanyan, Ngunawalwari, Dawurawari. Hello and welcome. Today we're here on Ngunnawal country. I am Shane Halloran, a proud Ngunnawal man. I'm a descendant of the Namich and Wallabalua clans of the Ngunnawal people. I acknowledge and honour my Ngunnawal ancestors and elders, who are the traditional custodians of the region encompassing Canberra, the ACT and surrounds. I extend my acknowledgement to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. I pay my respects to the traditional owners of the lands where my voice is being broadcast or streamed. I acknowledge Minister Linda Burney, Minister for Indigenous Australians, Michelle Law, Ming Long, and of course Professor王赓武. The Ngunnawal people also pay our respects to our traditional neighbours, the Gurungara to the northeast, the Walgaloo to the south, the Wiradjuri to the west, and the Yuin to the east. It's believed that a welcome to country is an ancient Aboriginal protocol that ensures that once welcomed, your body and spirit are protected whilst on another's land. The Ngunnawal people welcome you and call on our ancestors to provide you a safe journey during your time on country. We stand on lands that have been a meeting place for thousands of years, a place where matters of significance were discussed, including sustaining and sharing culture. Just as we gather here today in the spirit of dialogue and friendship, I'd like to introduce you to a Ngunnawal word The word is Yinjumara. Yinjumara is easily translated to mean respect, but its accurate description is a lifestyle of respect with the environment, with the lands and the people around you, but most importantly, a respect for yourself and how you talk and treat others. Here on Ngunnawal land, we've embarked on journeys with many different cultures. These encounters add to our journey and our story. It's a story of coming together, learning from each other and building respect. This shared journey highlights how every community adds unique colours to the rich tapestry that is the broader Australian story. The Chinese Australian community, through their resilience and achievements, has significantly enriched this land, echoing the Ngunnawal people's tradition of welcoming and open dialogue. We extend a warm welcome to all gathered here, highlighting the importance of collective impact, the idea that together we can build a community grounded in respect, understanding and inclusivity. It's our combined efforts that truly make a lasting difference. Yangu mura yinjumara gindula ningi, jane wingnangai galambanyi. We look forward to a journey of respect, to look, listen and learn together. Janyimaba. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shane. It's now my great pleasure to introduce the Minister for Indigenous Australians, Linda Burney, to deliver her welcoming address.
Distinguished guests, ministers, my parliamentary colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to extend a warm welcome to the 2024 Wengungu Lecture, and whom I've just met, and it's a great honour, sir. Thank you. Foreign Minister Wong, and I know I don't look like her, but I'm channeling her right now, sends her apologies, and she could not be here this evening. But it is my great honour, everyone, to open tonight's lecture on Minister Wong's behalf. Thank you, Shane, for your welcome to country, and I say Yinjamara back to you. I am of the Wiradjuri people, so a neighbouring nation to yours. I too acknowledge country and recognise that we are on Ngunnawal and Ngambri land. I also acknowledge Professor, so much for being here this evening, and it's wonderful to meet your family, your lovely daughter, and I think another daughter too. This is an annual lecture, everyone, and it celebrates Australia's diverse Chinese communities and the rich contribution that Chinese people from all over many parts of the world have made to our nation state. So it is with national pride that I welcome you here this evening. Half of Australia, of the nation's population, was born overseas or has a parent that was born overseas. And I think that's what makes the fabulous, rich cultural diversity of this country. Some Chinese people in Australia can trace their ancestry through generations of Australian history, back to the gold rush, for example, in the 1850s or even earlier. Some are the children or the grandchildren of migrants who uprooted their families and their lives to give their families a chance for a better one here in another country. Some are recent arrivals drawn to Australia because of our way of life, our prosperity and opportunity, and our welcoming multicultural society, and we should all be so proud of that. In the electorate that I represent, the electorate of Barton, it's an inner southwestern suburb in Sydney. Barton is home of one of the largest Chinese communities in Australia. In the suburb of Crimea, and I've remembered this for so long, the local market gardens have been occupied by farmers of Chinese heritage since the 1890s. The gardens played a pivotal role in feeding and supporting the local Chinese community, particularly during the Depression and the Second World War, and they are still there today. It is such an honour for me to usher in the Lunar New Year not so long ago in Hurstville. Hurstville boasts the largest celebration of Lunar New Year outside of Chinatown, of course. The Year of the Dragon ushers in a message of generosity and one that is common, and selflessness, and one that is common to the many cultures and religions. I'm a rooster, but that's pretty good too. Seeing Australia celebrate Lunar New Year over the past few weeks has been a stirring reminder of how far we have come. As Minister for Indigenous Australians, I also acknowledge the deep Chinese Aboriginal connections that exist in Australia. In fact, on my children's side, a great-great-grandmother is in fact Chinese. You need not look further than in this country to see that connection. There is a large family, Aboriginal family in Wellington called the Arsees, and there is a very large Aboriginal family in North Australia called the Arkits. And John Arkit, of course, was the first Aboriginal person elected to any parliament in Australia, and his daughter Nari is now in the Northern Territory legislature. Many Chinese Australians migrated to Australia during a time when the White Australia policy was still in place. The celebrations we now see in electorates like Barton could not have been imagined back then. I am reminded on this stage that the values of inclusion and acceptance underpin modern Australia. They must always be supported by our leaders. Those of us who have the privileged position of elected officers, we must show the leadership and never aim to divide and exclude, but to bring together and celebrate. We must always work to foster inclusion, acceptance and respect. This makes us stronger. And this is why I am particularly pleased that this year's speaker is Ming Long, an incredible woman. Ming is a champion for cultural diversity, and you'll hear as she speaks tonight just how powerful that is. She's the chairperson of the Diversity Council. She's on the board of Telstra, IFM Investors, QBE Insurance and CEDA. Ming was the first Chinese Australian woman to lead an AX 200 company when she was appointed to run Investor Office Fund in 2014. I would also like to acknowledge the strong advocacy from Ming in pushing constitutional recognition last year. I cannot thank you enough for that, Ming. Like Foreign Minister Penny Wong, Ming was born in Malaysia and moved to Australia when she was a child. Australia and Malaysia have a long story together, part of that being some 300,000 Malaysians who received an Australian education because of the Colombo Plan. And there are about 175,000 Malaysians now call Australia home, including Minister Wong and our keynote speaker tonight, Ming. Today's Parliament is the most diverse Australia has ever had, and I am proud to serve alongside my parliamentary colleagues, including Sally Situ and Sam Lim, who are here this evening. The government in which Minister Wong and I serve also has more women than ever before, and that deserves a clap, you fellas. We promote cultural diversity and also, of course, closing the gender pay gap. So I look forward to listening to you, Ming, with the words that you're going to share with us and with your story and reflections, which I think are incredible. I had a sneak preview, which I think are incredibly important. This is the third Wang lecture since 2022. I hope one of many more to come. So thank you, everyone. Enjoy listening to me and also putting up with me. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Minister Burney. Before I introduce tonight's keynote speaker, I'd like to share some personal reflections on what it means to be a small part of tonight's proceedings. Growing up in one of the handful of Chinese families in a regional Queensland town, I never could have imagined that I would be attending an event like this one. I never imagined that anyone would celebrate the contributions of Chinese Australian communities to this nation outside of customers hungry for more prawn toast at my family's restaurants. I never imagined that we would one day have a foreign minister with Chinese heritage. And I never imagined that I would have a career in which I told stories about Chinese Australian people. Because who would care about those stories? And who would want to hear about them from a young Chinese woman with no real status, but probably too much lip and stubbornness to make up for it? Surprisingly, at least to me, the answer was a lot of people. Our country is hungry for stories by Chinese Australians and to hear the voices of historically excluded people speaking on their own terms. Being Chinese Australian is a subject that I've spent most of my life pondering and then exploring in my work as a writer and actor. Through my books, films, television shows and stage plays, I've been preoccupied with teasing apart and examining what it means to inhabit this particular cultural identity. Whether it's a memoir essay about my parents' migration from Hong Kong to the Sunshine Coast in Queensland in the 1970s, to a stage play about a Chinese nail technician experiencing a Freaky Friday-style body swap with a white television executive, to a TV episode about a Chinese migrant and her young children navigating the family violence sector in Victoria. The thematic through line of my projects is often about recognising the strength and ingenuity of Chinese Australian communities, despite our marginalisation. Now, in 2024, with more than 1 million Australians identifying as having Chinese heritage, we are at least, statistically speaking, no longer on the margins. Maybe the swamping worked. And what continues to excite me is that we encapsulates innumerable communities. My most recent play, Miss Peony, was about a westernised, feminist, second-generation Chinese-Australian woman who was forced to enter a Chinese-Australian beauty pageant by her pawpaw, maternal grandmother, who is haunting her from the afterlife. Thankfully, it's not autobiographical. Miss Peony posited a question asked by many Chinese people in diaspora communities. What does it mean to be Chinese? Is it the language, the food, the traditions, the universal understanding that wearing shoes indoors is a crime punishable in the court of law? It's a question that I'm still grappling with, in large part because what it means to be Chinese varies depending on someone's unique set of life experiences. We are not a monolith, and the beauty of our culture lies in its great diversity. Which brings me to our keynote speaker of this year's Wang lecture, the incredible Ming Long, who has a dizzying number of accolades and high-ranking positions to her name. Ming Long is a respected leader in the business world with over 25 years of experience working across the real estate and finance sectors. She has over a decade of board experience, acting as a chair, CEO and CFO, leading listed and unlisted entities through challenging and uncertain economic environments. She was the first Chinese woman to lead an ASX 200 entity. Ming is currently a non-executive director of Telstra, IFM Investors, and QBE Insurance, as well as the chair of the Diversity Council of Australia, to name only a few of her many positions. Ming has a Bachelor of Economics and Law from the University of Sydney and an MBA from the University of Technology, Sydney. She is a Fellow of Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand, a graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors, and a member of Chief Executive Women. In 2020, Ming was awarded a Member of the Order of Australia for her significant service to the financial and real estate sectors and to diversity and inclusion. In 2023, she was the winner of the inaugural Asian Australian Lifetime Achievement Award. Please join me in welcoming Ming Long.
Thank you, Michelle and Shane, for your welcome to country. Minister Burney, I thank you for your well wishes for the Year of the Dragon. As my surname is actually in Chinese character, it is the Dragon, so I do hope that luck is on my side, particularly tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and friends, it is an honour to be asked to give the 2024 Wangguangwu Lecture, and I am humbled you would give up your time to listen to my thoughts. It was lovely just meeting Professor Wangguangwu, and when looking into his legacy, I see a history woven through China, Singapore, Malaysia, including Ipoh, where my mum was born, and time at the University of Malaya, and Australia, links that feel familiar and acknowledge his legacy from which I am able to stand here today. Thank you, sir. I and we stand on the shoulders of such great Australians who help us understand ourselves, who help others understand us. I would like to start by acknowledging that I and we and all those online in Australia stand on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander land. As Minister Burney has just highlighted, I tried to achieve a positive outcome at the referendum last year, and I want to particularly acknowledge the courageous Dr. Nora Scheinkestel, who is in the audience, and I can't see where I thought she was, there she is, who worked with me on the Directors for the Voice to garner support from the governance community. I know from the research undertaken by Diversity Council Australia, led by CEO Lisa Anise, that the root of racism in Australia starts with our treatment of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. I was reminded through the debate around the Voice of Parliament that people like me should go back to where I came from, and should I even have a say in that debate. With some suggestions, I was trying to turn Australia into Malaysia. It is in that environment that every time I hear a welcome to country from First Nations people who have been here for 65,000 years, they tell me, I am welcome and you belong. When previous governments wanted to water down Section 18 of the Racial Discrimination Act to allow greater freedom to say hateful things to already racially marginalised people, many ethnic, religious communities, including leaders from the Asian, Jewish and Muslim communities, together with First Nations elders, banded together to defeat it. We see the importance of that debate today through the rise of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And as Tom Calmer, who graciously did an oration for us last year, reminded me, Chinese communities have been allies with First Nations peoples from the gold rush days and beyond. Tom, we remain allies still. And despite the referendum of 2023, this will always be Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander land. My grandparents came from China. My parents born in Singapore and Malaysia. My family migrated from Malaysia in the early 1980s for our education. We moved from Kuala Lumpur, a major metropolis in a tropical country, to a little country town in the Blue Mountains in regional New South Wales. I have never been so cold, especially having to transition from swimming in warm tropical waters to an open-air pool in the school swimming carnivals in the Blue Mountains. We were the only Asian family in town, and it felt like the only Asians they had probably ever encountered. And whilst many were accepting of our presence in town, there was always going to a few that was going to make life hard. And it's hard to fit in when inevitably I was always going to stick out. Think about what you would say to a young Asian girl to remind her of who she is, to put her in her place. There may have also been fights in the playground that my parents still don't know anything about. There was an instance when I was asked to bring a plate to tea, so I brought a plate, an empty plate if you haven't got the... I was mortified, not just because I had brought nothing, but then it was really obvious. I'm an outsider. And even at 9 years old, society had taught me the hierarchy of importance, of white over colour, to know your place. Diversity Council Australia's 2022 research into racism at work found we lack racial literacy in Australia. We avoid using the word race. It's complex, so we don't talk about it. We have high defence mechanisms to dodge talking about race, protecting ourselves against any accusations of racism. And it can be weaponised to silence. This is evidenced by Australia being the only country in the world to call the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination Harmony Day. We use language like cultural diversity, culturally and linguistically diverse, multicultural, never race. At Diversity Council Australia, we now use the term culturally and racially marginalised to recognise that racism is a social process where some groups come to be viewed as different, outside the norm and or inferior due to their race, ethnicity, language or religion. And based on those perceptions, they receive unequal treatment. Racialisation creates a society in which some groups are racially privileged while others are racially marginalised. Uncomfortable truths, I know. I did not become an Australian citizen until 35 years after arriving in Australia. Some of you may know about the race riots in Malaysia in 1969. That fear as a Chinese Malaysian was passed on to me very early on by my parents, stressing to me the importance of keeping my Malaysian passport and citizenship. Because at some point, Australia may no longer welcome us or be safe for us due to the history of the White Australia policy in our country. Evidence again when I was a teenager, hearing Senator Pauline Hanson paint me as an unwelcome alien who would deliberately fracture and swamp this country. At some point, we might need to flee the country, but at least we had somewhere to go. Except 35 years later, my husband and children were Australian citizens, so there was no one to flee with, so I became a citizen. And I remember the ceremony not feeling any more Australian. There was no difference one way or another. It really was a non-event. Until 2020, when I was awarded an Order of Australia for significant service to the financial and real estate sectors and to diversity and inclusion. And at that time, Lieutenant General David Morrison, and I have to hold myself together because he is in the audience, he is retired, he's our former Chief of Army, and you need to close your eyes at this point and imagine a digger in a slouch hat in Australian Army fatigues saying to me, "Ming, you are a great Australian." In that instant, I felt like I was an Australian. I felt like I belonged. Thank you, David. But do decision makers trust Asian Australians? A 2023 Crawford School of Public Policy study led by Professor Robert Brunig focused on the promotional prospects of various demographic groups in the Australian public service. And Bob is in the audience today, so you can quiz him on his research afterwards. It showed that even Asian people who had lived in Australia since early childhood who speak great English are not being promoted, with staff from an English-speaking background 70% more likely to be promoted to executive-level roles. The data showed an incredible improvement for women, with the report finding no evidence of a glass ceiling for women. However, the racial factors were stark, even though Australia has not had a White Australia policy for 75 years. The study of 20 years of workforce data showed public servants from non-English speaking backgrounds face lower promotion prospects throughout their careers, irrespective of when they migrated to Australia, even if they were born in Australia or arrived before kindergarten. The public service as a whole reflects the diversity of Australia, with around 20% of staff from non-English speaking backgrounds. But despite this reflection, the population over the past 2 decades, about 96% of promotions to the executive have been awarded to staff of Anglo-Celtic or European names. And the least promoted are those with an Asian heritage. These results suggest there is an Asian penalty not related to language or cultural assimilation. Why do you think that is? I have a broad Australian accent. I can ham it up even more if needed, because I know it makes people here feel more comfortable. I might even be an Australian, have Australian values. Maybe you might trust me. It's like a Jedi mind trick. This is not an Asian woman looking at you, she's Australian. As a migrant here for over 40 years, I still feel pressure to publicly state my appreciation, gratitude, and loyalty to Australia, my full, undivided loyalty. I assume there is a bias that I am not wholly loyal to this country. That is why I was gobsmacked when Telstra, Australia's largest investor in digital infrastructure with security sensitivities, wanted to appoint me to their board last year. Maybe my Jedi mind trick actually worked. but more likely with a role model like Senator Penny Wong, that if we can trust an Australian with an Asian heritage with Australia's foreign policy and relationships, maybe we can trust other Australians with matters of importance. Maybe parts of our community are evolving faster than I have given them credit for. I am the black sheep in my family. To my parents' disappointment, I was the only child out of 4 who made the sacrilegious decision not to become a doctor when I had the marks to do so. Yep. I had gone to the Sydney University Medical Faculty Open Day and found someone poking at a body donated to science, and I literally walked out and chose economics law because it was the next ATAR after medicine, and that's how I made my decision. I will note, though, having worked in finance, that all my siblings want to talk about money, but at least I'll get free medical advice. I happened to be working in a real estate company when the global financial crisis emerged. And whilst the company was initially listed, it was taken over by private equity at the peak of the equities market in September of 2007. They had geared us heavily, as private equity so often does. And by December of that year, another real estate company was in serious trouble. Debt capital markets were seizing up, and for me, that was the start of the global financial crisis. When the Chief Financial Officer resigned, as any self-respecting CFO would if you were faced with a prospect of going under, the CEO at the time asked if I would consider the role. I declined. I knew how close we were to becoming insolvent. You see, the interest coverage for the company was below 1 times. That means I did not have enough income to pay the interest bill, let alone fund anything else. And one of our bank facilities' peak leverage got to 110%. Yes, what that means is the loan was worth more than the value of the assets against it. And I didn't have the luxury of throwing the keys back to the lenders because it cross-defaulted everything else in the company. It was a pretty grim time. But the CEO didn't give up on me. He set 2 female directors and a number of other people to work on me, and I eventually agreed. I agreed because I could not see another woman like me in any other real estate company in Australia. I could not see another time I would ever be offered a role such as this. Without a crisis, do you think anyone would give a woman like me a chance at leadership? There was a high chance this was going to be a glass cliff, but this might be the only opportunity I was ever going to get. Has anyone seen the movie Moneyball? Hopefully, if you haven't, you should go and watch it. But in that movie, the scout disrupted the process of picking players for baseball teams, going against traditional scouting attributes like looks, as an example, picking players based on their actual playing statistics. The CEO explained to me later that I was his Moneyball pick. A quiet Asian woman who was different to everybody else on the leadership team, underestimated by most people, even myself, except he saw the difference he needed. I knew my stuff, but I had never been a chief financial officer. And the US private equity investment bank wanted a world-class CFO. I was inexperienced in a number of areas, including a lack of confidence, a lack of leadership experience, and a complete lack of public speaking skills. The first time I actually did any real public speaking, my hands shook so much I couldn't hold a glass of water. It's not bad today, but this is a learnt skill. But he saw in me something that he needed to save the company that I couldn't see myself. And I didn't let them down. I remember facing the board meetings in New York, huge boardrooms full of investment bankers, these are men in suits, firing questions at me, the CFO. The company had become very important to the investment bank's own survival, so the scrutiny was intense. But I knew my stuff. I had multiple plans. I understood dependencies, stakeholders to manage. I knew which levers to pull. I remained agile for possibilities I had no control over. And I pulled the best from teams across the organisation, regardless of their position. And I brought the company and our lenders along with me by being fully transparent. And whilst leading in these unprecedented times, when real estate debt was still on the nose in 2012, I self-arranged and negotiated one of the largest real estate debt deals in the world at that time. And I am thankful for the relationships I had built with both domestic and foreign banks, that they trusted me to lend me their money. Till this day, I am grateful for the global financial crisis because it made me. Without it, I would not have been given the opportunity to lead the listed entity. And it was really much later when a friend told me that I was the first woman of an Asian heritage to do so. Without the GFC, I would not be where I am today. It is why I lament the lost brilliance we will never see, because the bias of society and leaders overlook people excluded from the status quo. That even if I demonstrate capability today, that people would assume I am not capable of changing to lead in the future. I was also there for a purpose that drove me. I wanted to save the company so that my friends and colleagues could keep their homes. I wanted to save the company for all those investors, those mums and dads, nurses, firemen, teachers, grandmothers, grandfathers, all those people like you and me wouldn't lose their life savings. That is why I love being on the board of IFM Investors, and our purpose to invest, protect and grow the long-term retirement savings of working people. When we had finally saved the company, the CEO retired to go back to the US, and that's when he promoted me to the managing director. I didn't want that too, but he gave up asking me. You see, when we had gone through the 5 years of the company being in crisis, we didn't miss a single interest payment. We didn't breach a single covenant. We paid back every single bank. Not a single bank lost money because of us. And from the peak of the crisis, where our shareholders owed a net liability, our turnaround meant we were able to return around 90 cents in the dollar. This is what my difference brought to the company. You see, diversity raises the bar. Diversity challenges the status quo. Diversity brings creativity, innovates, it makes work exciting. But diversity is hard. And as William Sloane Coffin Jr. said, diversity may be the hardest thing for you to live with, and perhaps the most dangerous thing for you to be without. My story would not be complete without honouring people in my family's history that have inspired me. My grandfather, Pastor Yim Tak Fat, who as a Methodist minister worked in a prison ministry in Malaysia, who every Christmas and Easter, regardless of religion, ensured each inmate in the entire Malaysian prison system received an apple, ice cream and KFC. Knowing, of course, that such food was luxury. He was one of the last people to see Barlow and Chambers, Australians who were executed in Malaysia for drug trafficking, who earned the trust of the then prison's Director General that he was exempt from a body search before being allowed in, who said it was better to serve than to be served. A role model for me that combines selflessness, humour and faith to serve others. My great uncle, Warner, who studied his master's at Stanford and as a senior engineer in the tubes department of the RCA Corps, led a small team which redesigned a component in radio communication to allow military aircraft to coordinate with ground troops in Operation Overlord at Normandy, subsequently honoured by the Queen with an MBE. My grand-uncle, Jacob Ye, an academically talented man who studied forestry at Penn State in 1915 and was then awarded a Goodyear Scholarship to study a Masters of Forestry in Yale, who saw the importance of the environment even before World War I, who after studying forestry at Yale, worked in the Chinese Labour Corps in France to help with their recovery after World War I, before returning to China as the head of forestry at Nanking University and recommended the site of the current Wuhan University, yes, it's that city, including its focus on forestry, and is credited with the planting of the many trees and cherry blossoms you see on campus and around the city today. My grandmother, who was university educated in China before World War II, when her father felt she should be educated like her brothers. It should not surprise you then that I care about gender equality, that I care about climate change, the environment, sustainability and science, that I care about equity. And whilst I highlight the inspiring things they were able to achieve, they did so also enduring great hardship. My grandfather, who lived through the fall of Singapore, who, because he always wore white as a Methodist pastor, was told to get out from sheltering under a tree during Japanese bombing because he would attract attention. He rode away in his bicycle only to find out later that the tree was bombed. Who also had his EPF, or superannuation in Australian speak, stolen by a former prisoner, but still kept his faith in God and people and continued helping former prisoners. My ancestors who suffered and survived the Japanese occupation in World War II and the Chinese Cultural Revolution, a time of great fear for academics and scholars in China. My story is one of millions of individual stories of Asian Australians that distinguishes us, but with common threads that bind us to all other Australians. Because I too know what it's like for people to think nothing of you because of your gender or the colour of your skin. Because I too remember what it means to be poor. Because I too know what it's like to be a citizen but never quite feel like I am welcome, belong or trusted. But don't feel sorry for me that I have had these experiences, because all these things have given me battle scars which have been earned through hard times, a greater ability to adapt and change because the status quo was never going to adapt to me. A different perspective from what you might be used to, gratitude and humility for what I have, strength and resilience, and a relentless determination to make the world a better place. This is the difference I bring. I also know that bias will wipe out my experience because I am too vocal. She's not quiet enough. Don't you think she's a bit overly confident? Feels aggressive. She can't have that experience. Who does she think she is? She's Asian. She can't be that tough. She must be exaggerating. There's a quote from The Imitation Game which I love. Sometimes It's the people no one imagines anything of who do the things that no one can imagine. We are at a time of great disruption, from climate change to AI to widening inequality. I see firsthand the impact of climate change through the insurance industry through my work on the QBE Insurance Australia Pacific Board. I see the cost of how slow the world has been on mitigation and transition. The growing global impact of climate change is being transmitted to all Australians, particularly impacting those who can least pay for the costs of climate change, to poorest and our children. It is why the economist in me laments the loss of the price on carbon, a price signal which would have helped organisations transition much earlier. I see the acceleration of digitisation, growth in data, the emergence of AI already through technology, both good and bad, and changing ways of working with work from home and flexibility. Its impact on the Australian workforce, how they work, where they work, how we make decisions, and the change in leadership that's required in this shift. And I see the impact of widening inequality, social, wealth, and intergenerational through my work on the board of CEDA and Diversity Council Australia. We cannot continue to operate the same way we have always done. And we will need all the talent and diversity in our community to create the future we need to create the future we want. We are the stewards of our future and our legacy. I have great hopes for our country, for the great capability and potential it has, and will continue to challenge it to be more than it is today, just as my parents' expectations that 99% was not good enough. So this is my wish for you as you walk on your leadership journey, and this is annotated from a speech that Chief Justice Roberts gave a number of years ago. He's from the US Supreme Court. From time to time, I hope you will be treated unfairly, so you will know the value of justice. I wish you bad luck from time to time, so that you will understand the role of chance in your life and understand that your success is not completely deserved, and that the failure of others is not completely deserved either. So you choose to be thankful. I hope at some time you feel powerless, so you understand the gravity of the power you do have and use it judiciously, with humility and responsibility. Whether I wish these things or not, bad things will happen to you, but I hope the choice of your response is that you strengthen your resolve and commitment to act ethically, morally, where your word is still your bond. I hope that you have the courage and strength to make the right choice, even though it may be harder and come with personal sacrifice. I do wish for you not to become angry at life's lessons, but to choose to remain kind, humble, and compassionate, so we leave a better legacy for our country. I know that many of you have already had these things happen to you. These lessons are priceless. We bring these lessons to our work and leadership and the communities and industries we serve. We all have the privilege and fantastic opportunity to deliver a future that is more equitable and fairer for Australia. And no matter how many bullies, detractors, hateful and divisive people I have met, there are so many others who are wonderful, helpful, and more. From the partners of the accounting firm who gave me a go in my first job and hired me in a recession, to the CFO who then became the CEO of the media company, to the CFO of the real estate company and the CEO when we were owned by private equity, to the chair of the board when I was running the listed entity. They were more than bosses. They were mentors, and I am so grateful I met them. I did not get here on my own. But I have also had to endure extremely challenging times working when I was mentally just hanging in there, when I wanted to give up, when I failed, when I didn't think I would survive and carry on. Scars which I carry with me today. In all of this, my family are my strength and my haven, particularly my husband, who supports me even though he thinks what I do is nuts, who did not care that men and women would look down on him for being a stay-at-home dad. Who I am today and what I do today brings threads from the past, legacies from my family's history. I want to be that person who plants the tree today that I will never sit under, just as they have done. And time is short. If I'm lucky, I will live maybe another 20 to 40 years. At the end, when I am dead and gone, I dearly hope my legacy to this country remains as Wang Wu has left his legacy with us. As my family's legacy is left with me, that I leave as my legacy as a gift to future generations of my family and this country. It has been a deep honour to be able to give this lecture. And in the wise words of Daryl Kerrigan, this is going straight to the pool room. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ming, for sharing your story and for being such a fearless trailblazer. The determination and gutsiness with which you've approached the road bumps in your life is inspiring, and the frankness with which you've acknowledged the challenges we face as a nation, particularly in regards to race and historical exclusion, is vital and emboldening. I'm so thankful for your words. As a Chinese person, I'm bound by filial piety to respect my elders. But as a westernised diaspora kid, I've also come to learn that age does not always denote wisdom. However, in this case, I'd love to be adopted as your younger sister because you are an absolute and literal boss. I mean, it'd be easy. Our mothers are both from the same small city of Ipoh, and we already have the same initials. So much of what you spoke about, from bringing an empty plate to social gatherings, something my mother did too when she first arrived in Australia, to the intersectional barriers that exist for Asian women especially, rings so true to myself and I'm sure many others hearing you speak tonight. Sharing our stories is such a necessary salve during divisive and disconnecting times, and it's been an honour hearing your story today, Ming. On behalf of the National Foundation for Australia-China Relations and the ABC, thank you, Ming, Minister Burney, Shane, and our special guest, Professor Wang Wu. And thank you for joining us for the 2024 Wang Wu Lecture. Have a good evening.